I don't tell many people this, but what I'm about to share really happened to me in Seattle. I'm 66, and the night it began, I was just a grandmother in a sensible cardigan who wanted a quiet, celebratory dinner with my family. "Old woman, you can't afford this restaurant," she said, loud enough for the lobby to freeze. The words hit me by the marble host stand, beneath a chandelier blown from glass the color of honey. She flicked her eyes to the leather-bound menus stacked like law books, the reservation book glowing on an iPad, and the line of Friday night guests gathered behind me beneath the big front window facing First Avenue. We'd come to mark my grandson Milo's 10th birthday after a day at Pike Place Market, the kind of evening that still means something in a city that's forgotten how to slow down. And in the seconds after the hostess, Maya, her gold nameplate tilted like a smirk, spit those words, I realized every gaze in the lobby had landed on my thrift store flats and drugstore lipstick, and that humiliation was about to become the only thing I could taste. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I'll rewind for you, but not too far. I taught middle school English in Tacoma for 31 years. You learn two crucial truths in a school. First, everyone underestimates older women. Second, a seating chart is a map to human power. After my husband Frank died, carpenter, sweet hands, loud laugh, aneurysm while sanding a set of maple drawers he was proud of, I moved north to Seattle to be closer to my son Caleb and his wife Nora, and the two reasons I keep breathing, Milo and his little sister June. I rent a small apartment in Belltown where I can walk to the sculpture park and the grocery store, and I keep a notebook just for listening, snatches of conversation, expensive shoes stomping into cheap puddles, the names of boats in Elliott Bay, and the people who carry secrets like they're invisible purses. Cinder and Sage had opened the winter before on First Avenue, between the Four Seasons and a high-end furniture showroom, all matte black brick and a brass door handle in the shape of a laurel. They had a spread in Seattle Met, glossy photos of a bone marrow brulee and butter-poached halibut, and a chef who looked like a war photographer. It was the kind of place where wealthy parents congratulated themselves for ordering carrot puree for their toddlers and tech teams toasted Series C rounds with burgundy that tasted like someone's excellent mistake. I'd suggested it because Caleb had a bonus, because I'd found a $50 gift card in a thrifted wallet I was honest enough to return, and because sometimes you want to show your family you're not done living in color. We were 6, me, Caleb in his Patagonia jacket, Nora, fantastically, pregnant with their third, the kids, both sticky from the mini donuts we'd bought near the Brass Pig at Pike Place, and my friend Marjorie, who'd driven down from Edmonds and never got invited anywhere glam. I'd called a week ahead and made the reservation for 6:30 under Eleanor, and a woman with a tight voice had confirmed the morning of, which is how I knew we weren't wrong. But I could feel it before Maya spoke. The room had that hush of money deciding where it's welcome. She looked like a magazine photograph, straight hair too sleek for real life, a blazer with structured shoulders, nails tinted mauve like fancy fog. She glanced over my cardigan, the kids' unspooled shoelaces, the birthday card peeking from my purse like a flag, and her eyes hardened with the pleasure of gatekeeping. "We don't take walk-ins for parties of 6, she said first, tapping the iPad, letting whoever stood behind us catch that phrase and feel vicariously superior. "We're not walk-ins," I said. "Reservation for 6:30, Eleanor." She hit the screen with one fingernail. The nail made a sound like a glass bead, skittering. "I don't see that here." I took my phone out. I'm always organized in public. It keeps people from climbing you like a ladder. "Eleanor Reed," I said. "You called to confirm at 9:40. Her smile was gentle the way potpourri is gentle, dried, perfumed, unnecessary. "If you had a confirmation, we would have sent a text," she said. "Did you receive a text?" "No," I said. "You called?" She leaned in, voice a notch lower, false compassion curling around the syllables the way smoke curls around an old photograph. Ma'am, this is a fine dining restaurant. Our average check is north of 200 per person. Maybe there's somewhere more family-friendly? 200 a person. I did the math without meaning to. Tuition numbers, grocery lists, rent. Maybe there's somewhere more. That was when she turned her head slightly, just enough to aim the blow, and said it too loud. Old woman, you can't afford this restaurant. Caleb stiffened. Nora half-stepped in front of the kids. Behind us, a young couple in matching wool coats exchanged looks that said they'd just been given a story to tell later over cocktails. Can you believe how the hostess protected us from the riffraff? I felt my ears burn the way they had when a ninth grader once called me Grandma grading rubrics and threw a paper airplane at my back. I waited just long enough for the room to fall completely quiet. I'm not arguing prices with you, I said. I'm telling you we have a reservation. Then you must have the text, she said. Because otherwise, how do I know you're not confused? You'd be surprised how often people like you, people like me, who don't go out much, she said, sweet as a poison cupcake. People like me taught your dentist how to read, I thought. People like me know how to map seats and remember faces. I inhaled, because breath is what you can control even when nothing else listens, and I looked past her shoulder down the hallway where I could see the bar, backlit like a prayer. A bartender with sleeve tattoos slid a coupe to a woman in a white blazer. A server in a long apron glided by with a tray of oysters that looked like church silver. We'll find somewhere else, I told Caleb, because my grandson didn't need a scene for his birthday. Mom, he said soft, and then I heard it, Maya's light laugh, the kind women make when they're pretending nothing is wrong, and the whisper to the woman beside her, another hostess, with a pearl clip in her hair. She probably thinks this is Olive Garden. Maybe my face didn't show it, but my chest did. That laugh would have been a small sound anywhere else. In the lobby of Cinder and Sage, it was the sound of a match struck near old paper. I looked at the polished brass on the door handle. I looked at the leather-bound menus. I looked at my grandson's eyes. Let's go, I said. And we did, out into the damp breath of Seattle, the wheels of June's stroller rattling over the sidewalk seams, past a valet in a black wool hat whose eyes followed us like he was the last person left in a lighthouse. We ended up 2 blocks away at the pink door, where the hostess looked at my cardigan like it was a sweater and not a diagnosis, and smiled at Milo as if 10 was the exact right age to eat spaghetti with meatballs the size of planets. They were full, but the bartender slid us into a big booth by the window, and the server brought a candle, and we sang off-key anyway, and I tipped 40%, because respect is a language you pay in public. If you've ever been humiliated and then fed, you know there's a moment, post-pasta, when your lungs remember their work, and your brain starts up like a machine that's been oil-starved. Mine started with a glint I'd seen at Cinder and Sage when I'd glanced back. A man in a navy blazer with a groove between his brows, conferring with Maya over the host stand. He'd looked harried, not haughty. He'd mouthed something like, "Where is table 12's?" And Maya had rolled her eyes. Not the "so, sir, I apologize" style of staff politeness. The rollout of someone who resents her boss and thinks she'll outrun the consequences. Back home that night, after gifts and hugs, and one more round of watching Milo fake sneeze the candle out, I made tea and sat at my small kitchen table facing the alley. I wrote down what I'd seen, names I'd heard and read, and faces I'd remember. The hostess Maya, the pearl clip woman Kira, the harried man in the navy blazer, probably the manager. The bartender with the sleeve tattoos, left-handed, ring finger bare. The server with the oyster tray walked like she didn't want her feet to touch the ground, which meant someone had trained her properly. Then I did what retired English teachers do when they're riled. I sharpened a pencil, turned on my laptop, and began to read. Cinder and Sage's website was spare and expensive-looking. The About Us page said, owned by Italian hospitality veteran Johnny Bianchi, with a photograph of a man whose smile had grown tired around the edges, as if the corners had been held up too long by strings. Yanni had opened trattorias in Chicago and San Diego before settling with his family in the Pacific Northwest. The address listed Belden Street in San Diego as the corporate office. The chef was one of those tattooed geniuses with sleeves and a 1,000-yard stare. The reservations platform was Reci. The press page had a link to that Seattle Met spread and a King 5 morning segment where everyone talked too quickly. Then I went elsewhere. The Washington State Secretary of State's Corporations database told me Cinder and Sage Hospitality, LLC, was registered to an address in Sodo, the kind of office a restaurateur who likes the smell of Journey might keep. Washington's Department of Revenue listed a UBI number and a sales tax account. The Liquor and Cannabis Board license lookup showed a spirits, beer, char wine permit issued 18 months ago, due to be renewed in 6. The L&I database, public if you know how to search, showed one complaint closed without penalties and another under investigation. I know what this makes me sound like: petty, nosy, bored. But humiliation is an accelerant, and older women spend decades being told to accept the small violences and swallow them with our broth. What I've learned is that some violences have paper trails, and some people who laugh near a host stand make mistakes. You can see if you tilt your head and squint. The next day, Saturday, I put on the cardigan again and walked down to First Avenue after sunrise, before the expensive brunchers arrived. Seattle wears its mornings like a secret. The ferries cut through the Sound, green and white, tugboats nudging freighters like sleepy whales. Outside Cinder and Sage, the lights were off, and the glass gleamed with the reflection of damp planters. The side door, the one marked Deliveries, was propped a half-inch by a folded cardboard wedge. Someone had been careless. I heard voices. A woman. "I'm telling you, he won't notice for another month." A man. "You don't know that." The voices floated from the back hall near the restrooms. I should have walked on. But I recognized her voice, smoke curling around old photos. I slid to the shadow by the window and angled myself so my ears did the work. "He's not even here half the time," Maya said. "Yanni trusts me to run the floor. That's why he gave me access." "Yeah, but access isn't ownership," the man said. "And Trent's already worried about comps." "He should be, Lau," Maya said, "because if he wants that bonus, he needs to stop pretending we're church. This is hospitality. People steal your time, you steal their money back." "You're stealing his money," the man said, low. "Don't put it on me." A pause, shoes on tile. I watched the reflection of a silver trash can lid tilt and flash. "Relax," she said. "It's not like we're skimming the till. We're managing guest experience. If a table no-shows, we charge the cancellation fee and move on. The platform makes it easy to reroute deposits." "You're rerouting them to your Venmo," he said, and I could hear his fear. "Maya!" The side door banged. I flinched. A dishwasher came out with a stack of bins and saw me in the glass. He startled. I lifted a hand as if I'd been admiring the font on the window decal that said Cinder and Sage in lowercase letters. "Sorry," I said, backing up. "Private property," he said, not unkindly, and shouldered the door closed. The cardboard wedge fell out. The voices cut off. I walked away with my heart knocking, down toward Harbor Steps, into the cool breathing of the city. Maybe I misheard. Maybe I was making a story, because stories were my old profession and my remaining talent. But the word Venmo rang in my ears like a bell in a quiet church. Reroute deposits, no-shows. The gleam I'd seen in the manager's face when he'd looked harried, the pearl clip woman's complicit nods, the Seattle Met spread, praising a place that might be rotten under the sheen. I've learned that modern theft is rarely a dramatic heist. It's often the disciplined erosion of small amounts that no one chases, because chasing is expensive. There are times in your life when you stand at an ordinary corner and everything turns like a stage set, and you glimpse, for a heartbeat, where the seams are. I stood there with the faint taste of last night's garlic in my mouth and knew in my bones that if I let this pass, The humiliation would follow me into the next meal and the next, until it built a nest somewhere inside me and laid eggs that would hatch into bitterness. I might be old, but I am not finished. I pulled out my phone and texted Marjorie. Coffee? She said Victrola on Pike and 30. I said perfect. The barista at Victrola had a constellation of freckles across her nose and a tattoo of an orca on her forearm. You look like you need something strong, she said, and I said, make it whatever you'd make for your mother if she came to confess a small crime she'd like to commit, but in the service of a higher moral order. And she laughed and handed me a macchiato that steadied my hands. Marjorie slid into the chair opposite me in her puffy vest. Tell me everything, she said, eyes bright the way friends' eyes are when they sense a story that won't demand they take sides against your family. I did. I told her about Maya's laugh, about the murmur behind the side door, about the word Venmo and the tone it wore, about the way people like Maya count on people like me to nod and go away. Marjorie listened the way a good congregation listens to a good sermon, not for the comfort, but for the assignment. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to be the kind of old woman dishonest people forget to be afraid of, I said. I'm going to make a seating chart. That afternoon, I sat by my window and started building one, not of students, but of players. Who sat where at Cinder and Sage? Who had access to what? I wrote names inside boxes and drew lines with arrows. Gianni Bianchi, owner, absent. Trent, manager, harried, controls comps, discounts. Maya, hostess, controls reservations. Tone setter, possible skimming via cancellation deposits. Kira, hostess, allied with Maya, pearl clip as a tell. Chef Adrian, artist, maybe oblivious or mercenary. Bartender, sleeves, loyal to the bar team, likely knows cash flow. Server, oysters, trained, silent type. Then, like the teacher I'll always be, I wrote the essential question at the top. What would hurt them enough to make them stop? The answer wasn't yelling at a hostess. It wasn't a furious Yelp review. Those are the outlets they count on, the pressure valves that let you blow steam that dissipates without moving any machinery. What hurts people who steal softly is daylight that turns accounts inside out. What hurts those who humiliate strangers is a story told meticulously enough that it enters the bloodstream of a city. I'm an old woman, but I'm also a person with patience, a laptop, time, and a grandson who deserves to grow up in a place where people don't get to laugh like that and keep their keys. Before I went to bed, I did one more thing. I called the restaurant's reservation line, which a machine answered with a polished male voice. You've reached Cinder and Sage. For reservations, please visit our website or text your party size to this number. I texted, Table for 2, Sunday, 6:30, under Eleanor. A minute later, my phone buzzed. A link to a deposit page appeared. A note said, a $25 per person deposit is required. Cancellations within 24 hours will forfeit the deposit. I filled in my information. When it asked for a tip, I left it blank. When it asked for special occasions, I wrote, birthday. And when the confirmation arrived, it did so twice, once as a receipt confirmation with a formal code, and once as a Venmo request from Amaya at Cinder labeled CNS deposit for Eleanor 6:30. I did not pay the Venmo, but I took a screenshot so perfect it glowed. What I didn't know, as I set my phone down and tucked myself in with a book I didn't read, was that the next day, someone else would see me at that host stand and think I was simply a woman with bad shoes and good intentions, and I didn't know that in less than a month, the owner of Cinder and Sage would press a set of brass keys into my palm and say, with a tired smile that finally looked like relief, it's better if you hold these. But in the morning, all I had was a plan and a reservation, and the certainty that when you place an old woman outside a locked door, she'll find out who cut the key. I showed up Sunday at 6:15 with Marjorie on my arm, both of us in the kind of dress retired teachers wear to their nieces' weddings. The lobby was half full, with the preening sound of waiting. Maya was there, in a new blazer, the pearl clip migrated to her own hair like she'd absorbed Kira, and when she saw me, her mouth froze for a heartbeat like a pond in a night wind. "Reservation for Eleanor," I said. She glanced down, then up, and the smile cranked into position. "Ah, you found your text?" "I did," I said. "Funny thing, though, I also found a Venmo request." For a moment, something in her eyes flickered. Then it went smooth. "Our system auto sends those if you opt for premium seating." "I didn't," I said, "but that's okay. I brought premium company." I gestured to Marjorie, who beamed with a warmth so cultivated it could have grown in a greenhouse. "Follow me," Maya said, and her heels clicked down the hallway. As she led us past the bar, the sleeve tattoo bartender glanced up and clocked me with that bar psychic look they have, the one that spots trouble and tips generously. We sat. We ordered. The food was excellent, which made me angrier. Bad places should taste bad. But the scallops were seared like confessions. The bread was warm like a hand. Halfway through the meal, a commotion near the lobby drew eyes like a magnet. A couple was arguing with Kira, whose pearl clip trembled like a small sail. "We paid the deposit," the woman was saying, phone out. "We paid here." She held up a Venmo screen with a name blurred by her moving thumb. "We paid. We're on time." "Then you must have the text," Kira said, channeling her queen. "Because otherwise, how do I know you're not confused?" Marjorie gave me a look. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the host stand, which was when a man stepped out of the side office. He wore a navy blazer and carried stress like a violin case, carefully, but for too long. "Is there a problem?" he asked, eyes scanning like a conductor's. "Trent," Maya said, appearing as if conjured. "We have it under control." But I could see it already. They didn't, and whatever was about to snap would make the sound of a string breaking in a quiet hall. I smiled politely at Trent, because that's the weapon I'd kept sharpened for decades. "I'm so glad you're here," I said. "I've been wanting to talk about your deposits." He looked at me like the word deposits had never sounded so much like a storm warning. "Ma'am," he said, "if you'll return to your table." "I think you'll want to hear this," I said, and lowered my voice just enough so he'd have to step closer, just enough so the guests behind me couldn't hear, just enough to make Maya twitch with the knowledge that something was not under her control anymore. "Because your hostess is charging guests through her personal Venmo, and I brought receipts." Trent's eyes flicked to Maya, who stood very still, like a dancer about to choose whether to leap or fall. And that was when a man cleared his throat behind us, his Italian accent softening the consonants like butter in a pan. "What is going on in my restaurant?" he said. I turned and saw him, Gianni Bianchi, in a blazer that had fit better last year, with a face that had hosted more evenings than it should have had to. He looked at me, then at Maya, then at Trent, and for the first time since this began, the hum of money in that lobby tilted toward silence, as if the whole room were holding its breath to hear how a story like ours ends. It was time to move the seating chart from pencil to ink, and to find out just how badly people who laugh at old women have miscounted the chairs. I didn't become a teacher by liking conflict. I became one by believing that structure can make chaos behave. So I handed Trent my phone and watched him see the screenshots, the automated Resi confirmation, time-stamped, the Venmo request from Shis Maya at Cinder, time-stamped a minute later, the text exchange where I asked, "Is this official?" and got a winking emoji reply. He paled. Maya said, "That's not mine," which is what liars say when you show them their handwriting. "Let's discuss in the office," Trent muttered, but Gianni shook his head. "In front," he said softly, "is where we fix what happens in front." We moved to the side of the host stand. Guests watched without pretending not to. Maya clasped her hands like they could generate a new reality if she squeezed hard enough. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "My Venmo, our Venmo," she looked at Kira, who blinked, "is used for private dining deposits when Racy is down. It's always reconciled." "And you reconcile it," I said. Personally? Because I'm trustworthy, she said. And if you've ever heard the word trustworthy deployed like a weapon, you know how it lands. Johnny's eyes were on the screen. This was sent to an individual account, he said, more to himself than to us. Not to Cinder and Sage. Why would that be? Because she wanted to make sure I didn't show up, I said pleasantly. That's a guess, of course. Maybe she didn't want a certain kind of person in the lobby. Maybe she wanted to discourage what was it, Maya? An old woman. Maybe she thought she'd skim my $25 too, just to sweeten the humiliation. Maya's mouth thinned. This is slander, she said. You can't just accuse me of... I don't need to. Accuse, I said, keeping my voice calm, the way you do with a classroom about to flip a desk. I brought screenshots. Also, and this was the part I enjoyed in a way I'm not proud of, I've already heard you talk about rerouting deposits. Yesterday, by the side door, the one propped with cardboard when it shouldn't be. I imagine Health would be interested in that, too. Kira shifted, horror dawning on her face in a way that suggested her complicity had been coerced or paid for. Trent rubbed his temple. The couple still arguing with her looked vindicated, phone screens held out like torches. Johnny inhaled. Maya, he said, did you or did you not solicit deposits through your personal accounts? She hesitated just long enough to make it clear that whatever came next would be less like truth and more like strategy. I did what I had to do, she said finally, defiance lighting her shoulders. You weren't here. You never are. The system breaks. People cancel. I kept a solvent when you couldn't be bothered to show up. There it was, the villain's first honest sentence. I glanced at Gianni and saw a man kneeling to pick up the pieces of something he dropped in a dark room. Come, he said, voice flat. All of you. He looked at me. You too, Signora. We followed him down the hall, into an office that smelled like lemons and paper and the last month of a fiscal year. He closed the door. He sat. He folded his hands and listened as Trent, voice shaking, walked through the contents of my screenshots as Kira admitted she'd just followed Maya's instructions, as Maya tried to paint herself as a guerrilla savior of a restaurant too delicate to survive by the rules. When they finished, Gianni looked at me. You teach? He asked. I did, I said. I still do, in my head. He nodded. And you know how to count to the end of the month? I know how to read, I said. And I know how to make people who think old women don't matter regret it. He closed his eyes briefly. I am old, too, he said. Not as old as you, maybe, but old enough to be tired. He opened a desk drawer and took out a stack of papers. This place is beautiful, he said, voice soft, but it is bleeding, and the bleeding makes people do... He let the sentence fall. Trent, you will run the numbers with her, he said, nodding toward me. Maya, give me your keys. Maya laughed, a sound without humor. You can't fire me. I built the front of house. You built a siphon, he said, and held out his hand, palm up, patient as a confession booth. For a second, I thought she'd throw her keys at him like a TV character. But she didn't. She took them off the ring slowly, metal ringing against metal like a tiny bell in a very rich church. She set them in his palm with a click. This isn't over, she said, and looked at me, with such concentrated contempt it could have set paper alight. No, I said, matching her gaze. It's just beginning. And then the door opened without a knock, and Chef Adrian stepped in, eyes blazing, aprons smeared with the kind of sauce that makes critics write about the heart. He took in the keys, the faces, the tension. What's happening? He said. Gianni looked at me as if the question were mine to answer. For the first time since Old Woman hit the air like a slap, I felt something in my chest loosen, as if a hinge had been oiled. We're about to find out, I said. But first I need to see the books. The chef stared. Trent swallowed. Maya's smile curled back like a cat ready to scratch. And somewhere far out in the dining room, a table's laughter turned brittle, like glass just before it shatters. I know the sound glass makes because I've got the kind of hands that once fell asleep grading essays on metaphor and woke up knowing which ones would last. This wasn't over, it was a prologue. And if you think old women can't write a story with an ending sharp enough to cut, then you've never watched one walk calmly toward the knives. We sat shoulder to shoulder, 4 of us jammed into an office meant for 2. Me, Trent, Chef Adrian, and Gianni, who looked like a man trying to hold onto a rope above a void. On the computer, the POS system blinked with rows of numbers that at first glance looked like an orderly C. Service charges, deposits, voids, comps. I asked Trent to filter by deposits. He did. I asked him to export the last 90 days. He did. And when the spreadsheet bloomed on the screen, I saw what I'd suspected. An unusually high percentage of deposits categorized as manual, a column where the RESI confirmation code should be blank, an odd pattern of timestamps concentrated during Maya's shifts. Pull Venmo records to compare, I said quietly. Maya's, Trent said, nervous laugh. I know a workaround, Chef said, surprising us. She used the host iPad sometimes. If she wasn't careful, browser autofill will show the handle. He clicked, fingers moving with the precise grace he used to plate scallops. In the autofill suggestions, a handle popped up. Maya at Cinder. A second, a host team Cinder. A third, a Cinder private. The chef swore softly in a language I don't speak but understand when it's used for grief. Print this, Yanni said. We should call someone, Trent murmured. A lawyer. Later, Yanni said. First, numbers. He was right. If humiliation is an accelerant, then clarity is water on a hidden ember. We printed the last 90 days. We marked overlaps. We matched timestamps. In the late Sunday hush, with the dining room humming and forks clinking beyond the door, I felt the familiar calm I used to feel proctoring big exams. Order had entered the room, and order was the beginning of justice. Outside the office, Maya was not gone. She'd paced the hallway with her phone pressed to her cheek, then to her ear, then back to her cheek. I could see her through the glass panel, face tight, whisper harsh. When she realized we were watching, she smiled and mouthed, "Everything okay?" like a neighbor at a fire. I thought of Milo's candle, of the way a child believes a wish can push the world into alignment. I thought of the chorus of small despites women like Maya sing under their breath. You don't belong, you misunderstand, you can't afford. And I thought, we'll see who can afford what. Because the next step was not just numbers. The next step was a plan that would make this hurt in the only way that mattered to people who think they're invincible. In the ledger, in the court, and in the court of public opinion. And to do that, I'd need to move beyond the office and into the city, because revenge that lasts isn't served hot. It's served with paperwork. Which is why the next morning found me at the King County Courthouse on 3rd Avenue, walking through the security line with a tote bag and a thermos of coffee, my hair in a clip I'd bought at Bartell Drugs. I wasn't there to sue, not yet. I was there to pull what I could. Business filings, public complaints, wage theft cases. I looked up the L&I investigator assigned to Cinder and Sage and wrote down an email address and a phone number. I made a note to call the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board to confirm their policy on deposit handling and whether off-platform payment constituted a license violation. I called a friend who used to write for the Seattle Times and left a voicemail. Remember me? Eleanor Reed, your son's favorite English teacher. I have a story that tastes like rotten bone marrow under sugar. Call me back if you want your readers to care about the right things. By lunch, I was at Macrina Bakery on First for a sandwich, where a delivery driver with flour on his sleeves recognized the Cinder and Sage name when I mentioned it to the cashier. They're late with invoices sometimes, he said, shrugging. Everybody is. But them, always later than they promise. Is there a manager to speak to about that? I asked, and he laughed. If you find one, he said, tell him to answer his phone. I walked and I listened. At Pike Place Fish, A guy tossing salmon told me they'd dropped Cinder and Sage from a weekly program because they were flaky with terms. At a small farm table selling carrots so perfect they looked animated, a woman in a knitted cap said, "If this is about them paying us net 90 instead of net 30, you can tell them old women grow carrots too, and we can wait them out longer than they can wait us." By evening, my tote bag held a stack of notes, and my lungs held that hummingbird energy I get when a plan is no longer just a plan. I texted Trent, "I can help. You. But I'll need Yanni to authorize me to look at vendor accounts and 3 staffers willing to tell the truth." He wrote back within 10 minutes. "Come at 10 a.m. Chef and I will be there. Gianni, too." I slept fine for the first time in days. When I walked in Monday morning, Maya's face was not at the host stand. Kira's was, pale and small. "She's not here," Kira whispered, like a child telling on another child without wanting the blame. She said she had an appointment. Gianni emerged from the office, tie loosened, eyes ringed. He shook my hand like a man holding gratitude he didn't know how to carry. "I should have been here," he said. "Being here isn't the same as seeing," I said, and we sat. We went through vendor lists. We made calls. We learned that more deposits had gone missing than we'd first seen. We heard from a dishwasher named Rosa, who'd been shorted on a check when overtime posted as training, and from a server named Eve, who'd been told she'd get written up if she questioned tips pooled with administrative staff, hostesses, convenient. We compiled and labeled and dated. We built a dossier the way I used to build units, tight, sequenced, evidence-heavy. "Will this ruin us?" Johnny asked finally, voice small. "If we do it wrong," I said. "If we do it right, it will make you honest and her unemployed, and it'll warn every other Maya at every other glossy host stand that old women are not garden statues." He smiled, just a little. "What do? "We escalate," I said, quietly, then loudly. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "Teach me," I began, and in the middle of my second sentence, the front door opened, and Maya walked in with an attorney whose shoes cost more than my entire outfit and whose gaze swept the room like a scanner in a spy movie. "Before you do anything rash," Maya said, smile bright as a blade, "you'll want to read this." The attorney set a folder on the host stand. The tab read, "Demand for severance and non-disparagement." And just like that, the war started. The attorney's shoes were the kind that clicked like a metronome for intimidation. He opened the folder as if unveiling a sculpture. "Ms. Bianchi," he said. He'd gotten Gianni's last name wrong and hadn't cared enough to fix it. "My client has stewarded the front of house through extraordinary turbulence. She is prepared to resign in exchange for 12 weeks severance, a full mutual non-disparagement clause, and a letter of commendation suitable for future employers. If you refuse, we will file immediately for injunctive relief and damages related to defamation, interference with livelihood, and the unlawful seizure of personal funds." Johnny didn't blink. "Personal funds," he repeated, as if the phrase were a fly he didn't want to swat in front of guests. "Deposits collected during system outages," the attorney said smoothly. "Held in trust." "Held in Venmo," I said. Trust is a larger word than an app. Maya's mouth twitched. "You're a retired teacher," she said to me, every syllable a sugar packet ripped open. "This is an adult industry. You can't diagram this sentence into innocence and guilt." "Lucky for us," I said. "It doesn't need diagramming. It needs arithmetic." Gianni folded the demand letter in half and set it on the host stand like a coaster he had no intention of using. "If you believe you are owed anything," he said, "we will have our counsel review your claims after we reconcile accounts with the Department of Revenue and the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Until then, you may wait." He glanced at the attorney's shoes. "Preferably not in my dining room." The attorney's smile cracked a millimeter. "You understand that, in the meantime, any public statements you make will invite litigation?" "You understand that truth is a complete defense," I said, and watched his eyes finally land on me, annoyed at discovering the person in the room with homework done. "Who are you?" he asked, the way people ask a stray dog how it learned to open doors. "Someone who paid attention," I said, "and someone who heard your client brag about rerouting deposits by the side door she left propped with cardboard. If you'd like, I can send you the audio file along with the screenshots." Maya's lashes fluttered. "You recorded me?" she said, as if I'd stolen a family recipe. "In Washington, one-party consent," I said. "I am the party." The attorney closed his briefcase with a sound like a decision you don't want to have to make. "Expect a letter," he said, and they left. We did not expect a letter. We expected a storm. We spent the afternoon sandbagging. I started with Resi, their support rep, a woman named Tiffany, who sounded like she solved problems for fun, confirmed that the platform never, under any circumstances, sends Venmo requests from individual handles. "That's wild," she said, professional voice straining to hold back the human. "Please email me everything. We'll escalate internally." I called the Liquor and Cannabis Board and asked whether deposit handling via personal accounts might implicate the license. The investigator on duty said, careful, "While we don't regulate deposits, any off-book handling that touches service charges or appears to be part of the restaurant's financial flow can become our business if it looks like evasion. Send what you have." I emailed the L&I investigator about Rosa's overtime being labeled training and Eve's tip pool complaints, attaching declarations we drafted and signed that morning while the espresso machine frothed like a small storm. I left a second voicemail for my former student's mother at the Seattle Times. "It's Eleanor again," I said softly. "It's a story about a woman who laughed at the wrong person." By closing, the phone at the host stand looked like a sparrow that had flown repeatedly into a clear window. Reservations called, vendors called, a woman named Candace called to sob that she'd been charged a deposit twice, and could someone please pick a version of the truth and let her keep her anniversary? Kira kept looking at the door as if Maya might materialize with a wand and turn us all into coat racks. I went home, wrote, and prepared. I drafted a timeline, the night of the insult, my Sunday reservation, the Venmo request, the confrontation, the audit, the demand letter. I made copies of everything and put them in a manila folder labeled CNS, Reconciliation. I put the originals in a freezer bag I buried in a sack of flour in my cupboard, because sometimes you listen to every thriller you've ever read. The letter arrived Tuesday morning, emailed first, printed by courier an hour later. It was exactly what we anticipated. 12 weeks, non-disparagement, threat soup. We responded with a short note drafted by a family law attorney who lived down the hall from me and had once traded me banana bread for proofreading. "All allegations are denied. Pending reconciliation and cooperation with relevant agencies and vendors, Mr. Bianchi declines. Ms. Reed," that was me, "is assisting pro bono in good faith and will likewise be represented if necessary. Please preserve all records." That afternoon, my voicemail pinged with a callback that lifted my heart like a surprised bird. "Eleanor, it's Dottie from the Times. My editor likes the bones of it. We need documents, interviews, and a clean nut graph. Think you can come by tomorrow with your folder?" "I'll bring a cake," I said, because if you've ever tried to convince a newsroom to care, you know they run on sugar and proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was greedy. I wanted more than a tidy internal reckoning. I wanted the kind of reckoning that fixes rituals. A host stand is a ritual. It's where a city tests whether it deserves itself. If a city decides an old woman can be skimmed, refused, laughed at, it decides its soul can be skimmed, refused, laughed at. I wasn't going to let that be the decision carved into Seattle's soft cedar heart. Wednesday broke clean. I walked to Occidental Park with my tote, then to the Times building with a lemon cake studded with poppy seeds and rage. Dottie hugged me in the lobby like I'd graded her boy fairly in 1998. And I had, I'd circled his adverbs and told him to be precise, and led me upstairs. I laid out the timeline. I showed the screenshots. I played the audio. Maya's low voice, the word reroute, purring like a cat that knows which cupboard holds the tuna. Dottie's pen danced. Her eyes got the sharp gleam of a hawk over Lake Union. "We'll need a comment from the restaurant," she said. "You'll have it," I said. "But we'll need something else first. We'll need somebody besides me who knew it was wrong and can say so on the record." She looked at me over her glasses. "You have someone?" "I have 3 someones," I said. "And a 4th who will find her courage if the other 3 go first." I texted Rosa and Eve and the sleeve tattoo bartender, whose name turned out to be Joel. They met us at a coffee shop on 2nd with wobbly tables and excellent muffins. They told Dottie what they knew. Not everything was perfect. Rosa was scared. Eve was fierce. Joel cracked jokes to stop his hands from shaking. Dottie wrote. She asked the right second questions. When she left, my shoulder blades loosened. I could feel the story leaving my small life and entering the bloodstream of the city, where it could do its work. We gave Dayani a heads up. He looked at the ceiling like a man negotiating with a god he wasn't sure he believed in, but thought might be swayed by humility. "We'll tell the truth," he said. The piece went online Friday afternoon, a headline that didn't peddle sensationalism, but didn't hide either. Complaints, Venmo deposits, and a host stand in question at Cinder and Sage. Within an hour, King 5 emailed asking for on-camera comment. Within 2, Resi called to say they were disabling Cinder and Sage's manual deposit option until internal controls could be verified. By dinner, the Liquor and Cannabis Board popped in, quiet as librarians, to count receipts like breadcrumbs. Maya responded on Instagram with a story slide in muted beige. "Hurt people hurt people. Women in leadership are often demonized. I pray for those who try to tear down what they can't build." Underneath, a link to a GoFundMe titled, "Help Me Survive a Smear Campaign." The photo was artfully lit. Donations trickled in, then slowed when a commenter linked the article and said, "This you?" We didn't gloat. We prepared, because it wasn't over until the ledger sang. The following Monday, we hosted the most excruciating dinner service of my life, followed by the most satisfying. We kept the doors open. We comped nothing without documentation. We seated everyone who came through the door with eyes that said, "You are welcome, and if we fail you, it won't be by cruelty." Word had gotten around. People came to see the mess, to witness the apology. Some came to jeer, then ordered the halibut and fell quiet. Halfway through, 2 men in jackets showed up with badges that got no introduction, officers from the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by the L&I investigator. "We're here to pick up records," one said. Trent handed them boxes he'd labeled at 3 a.m., and then, because the world occasionally believes in theater, Maya arrived. She wore white, like a declaration of innocence, and a smile like a bridge over a flood. With her was a cameraman from a lifestyle blog that loved a scandal. She marched to the host stand, stared at Kira until the girl stuttered into the back, and looked at me. "Still here?" she said. "Still here," I said. "That's the thing about women like you," she said, the line rehearsed. "You think stubbornness is a virtue." "That's the thing about women like you," I said. "You think charm is a receipt." Her gaze flicked past me to the dining room, where people pretended not to notice. "You stole my job," she said. "You pawned it," I said. "We just found the ticket." Johnny appeared, tie on, mouth a flat line. The financial crimes officers watched like men who'd learned the hard way when to step in. Maya tossed her hair and lifted her voice for the camera. "Seattle," she declared. "This is what happens when the old guard feels threatened by a young woman who refuses to apologize for being excellent." "My mother is a young woman," Johnny said, in a tone that made me love him. "And she is 84. He held up a hand. "Maya, you are trespassing." "You won't call the police," she said. "We won't have to," I said, nodding toward the badges. For a moment, I thought she'd make a scene that ended with cuffs and a mugshot and me going home feeling triumphant in a way that sours overnight. But she didn't. She looked at the officers. She looked at the room. She looked at the camera and realized there were two kinds of footage, the kind that made you a martyr and the kind that made you a memo. She turned, chin high. The cameraman trailed. The door closed on the damp Seattle evening like a breath released. We finished service. At 11:30, with the last table paid and the floor mopped and Joel counting the till with a seriousness that would have made an auditor weep, Johnny came from the office, holding something that glinted under the pendant lights. He walked to the host stand where that first night had bruised me. He looked at me with an expression that held apology, gratitude, and, for the first time since I'd met him, rest. "Signora," he said, and placed a brass ring in my palm. The keys were heavy, shaped by years of palms, cold like honesty before it warms. "It is better if you hold these until we finish the audit. You will close with Trent and open with me. I don't like to admit it, but you see more than I do." The staff had gathered. Kira wiped her eyes. Rosa smiled with her whole face. Joel whistled softly, a single note that sounded like respect. "You don't have to," I began. "I do," he said. "Otherwise, every person who watched what happened to you in this lobby will believe we are a place that lets it happen. We are not that place. Please, help me be the place you were brave enough to demand." I slid the keys into my cardigan pocket. They pulled at the fabric, lovely as a sentence finally weighed down by the right clause. "For a while," I said, "until you hire a woman twice as mean and half as tired as me." He laughed, the sound one makes when a night has finally decided to end. "Deal," he said. The audit finished 2 weeks later. The numbers were worse than we feared, not catastrophic, but braided with a cunning that would have looked like noise if we hadn't tuned the dial. Ressi sent a letter praising our cooperation and privately banning Maya from administrator roles on any account under their umbrella. The Liquor and Cannabis Board decided to issue a warning and demand corrective measures rather than a fine because transparency arrived fast and whole. Elle and I opened wage claims that produced checks with extra zeros and phone calls that began with "I'm sorry" and didn't end with "but." SPD's Financial Crimes Unit forwarded their findings to the prosecutor. What happens next will happen at a pace that belongs to courtrooms, not kitchens. I won't gloat if she is charged. I won't mourn if she isn't. I did what I came to do. I made a seating chart of a problem and sat courage in its assigned seat. On the first night, we reopened with a new GM, a woman named Tanesha who'd run a room in Chicago like the director of a very good play. I stood at the host stand in a navy dress and the same thrift store flats, because sometimes you keep a talisman and sometimes you win without changing your shoes. A couple walked in, gray-haired and laughing, and a little tentative in the way people get when they've been told the shiny places are not built for them. "Do you have a reservation?" I asked. "We don't," the woman said, embarrassed. "We were walking by and it smelled so good, and then we saw your name on the door in the paper." I smiled and reached for 2 menus, leather catching the light like a well-kept promise. "We'll make room," I said. "We always make room." They followed me to a small table by the window where you can watch the city decide what kind of place it will be. They ordered the halibut. They closed their eyes at the first bite. I went back to the stand and leaned my elbows where a woman once laughed in the wrong key. Caleb brought Milo and June a week later to see where Grandma worked. We had spritzers for the kids, a red for Caleb, and sparkling water for me because someone needs to remember who breaks which glass. Nora, 9 months now and radiant, squeezed my hand. "You look happy," she said. "I look busy," I said, but it was the same thing. After dessert, we stepped into the lobby to leave, and an older man in a Seahawk cap hesitated by the door like he wanted to ask a question and wasn't sure he was allowed. He looked at me. "Ma'am," he said, "do you think someone like me could afford this place?" I thought of the first night, of the marble, of the laugh. I thought of the keys cooling in my pocket and the way they had warmed over the last 2 weeks with the heat of 100 small decent decisions. It depends, I said, on what you're buying. If it's reassurance you're welcome, that part's already paid. He nodded, eyes wet in the way men's get when they don't have a napkin nearby. Then I guess I can, he said, and he opened the door for his wife, like a man who had remembered his manners and been thanked for it by the air. I didn't keep the keys forever. When Tanisha finished her training week and Gianni slept 8 hours in a row for the first time in months, I put the ring in his hand and told him it had done its work with me and was ready to do its work with him. He kissed my cheek in the Italian way twice and whispered, "You saved my place." "I saved my dignity," I said. "Your place came along for the ride." On my way out that night, I stopped at the pink door and left a cash tip that could have rented a car for a day. The hostess didn't remember me, which is the most honest kind of hospitality. I walked home along First, past windows that hold reflections like temporary truths. In the dark glass of a furniture store, I saw an old woman in a cardigan, walking with her back straight, the city's damp air lifting her hair. She looked like someone who could be mistaken for a softness and choose to be a blade. When I got to my building, I stood in the narrow hallway and listened to the quiet that happens when people have eaten well and gone to bed. I set the tote down. I took the keys, my house keys, not his, out of my pocket and held them in my palm. In the dim, they looked like teeth. Humiliation is a door. Revenge is not kicking it in. It's finding the right key, sliding it into the lock, and turning until the tumblers fall in love with order again. That night, I slept as if my bones had finally agreed to be scaffolding for the woman I still am. And in the morning, when I walked past Cinder and Sage, the laurel-shaped handle flashed in the gray light like a small, faithful sun. I touched the glass the way you touch a forehead to check for fever. Inside, someone had left a single place setting at the corner of the bar. A plate, a napkin, a glass. It looked like a promise you can only keep if someone asks you to. I unlocked my phone and typed a note in my listening notebook. Don't mistake quiet for surrender. Don't mistake age for absence. Remember the taste of being fed after being shamed. Remember that keys weigh the same in every hand, but they mean something different in an old one. Then I put the phone away, and the city moved, and the door stayed open. The end.